Welcome to the history section.
Our mission in this podcast is to examine the specific remnants of Norwegian and Danish rule in the north of Scotland.
We're focusing quite intensely on the Orkney Isles and then the adjacent mainland regions of Caithness and Sutherland.
That's right. And we'll be analyzing the historical accounts, the linguistic evidence you find in place names, and of course the monumental structures that really define the long-term Scandinavian impact.
We should begin, I think, with the Orkneys. They were really the unquestioned apex of Scandinavian power in this entire region.
They were, and the physical geography of the archipelago was, well, it was the central reason for this importance.
So historically, the Orkneys were seen as much more significant than, say, the Shetland Isles.
Oh, absolutely. For several reasons, but primarily because of their greater fertility, which could sustain a larger population. And most critically, their physical proximity to the Scottish mainland.
Right. That combination of factors, being self-sustaining and also strategically located, that's what allowed the islands to become the chief seat for the powerful Norwegian jarls.
It is. The geography meant the Orkneys were the perfect central point from which Norwegian military and administrative power could be projected across northern Scotland and, even further.
It gave them a secure, stable base for assembling these large war-ready fleets.
Exactly. History tells us that many of the Danes and Norwegians who campaigned or settled north of Scotland often congregated in the Orkneys before they launched any major operations.
So this centralization of resources and command meant the jarls who were governing the islands could, with relative ease, pull together these massive fleets.
Manned by Scandinavian warriors, yes. The history of conquest in northern Scotland is quite clear on this. It was primarily Norwegians operating from the Orkneys, under the authority of these jarls, who made the really extensive conquests deep into Scottish territories.
And this wasn't just raiding, was it?
No, not at all. This was a true projection of sustained political and military force. It required complex logistical support that really only a central hub like Orkney could provide at the time.
When we look at the dynastic leaders who established this dominance, there are a couple of figures who really stand out.
Two in particular define the ultimate territorial extent of this Orcadian power. First, you have Jarl Sigurd the Stout.
He made a very strategic marriage, didn't he? To a daughter of the Scottish king, Malcolm II.
He did. It was a political move that gave him a crucial, if temporary, layer of legitimacy to his expanding power base. Sigurd really distinguished himself through these exceptionally bold Viking expeditions. He secured the foundations.
But the power, it truly peaked with his son, Jarl Thorfin.
Yes, who inherited his father's bold spirit and, crucially, his mother's royal Scottish lineage.
Thorfin's domain was extraordinary. The research confirms his power surpassed that of all his predecessors, and indeed his successors in the islands.
It's quite something. The sources indicate he ruled over no fewer than 11 earldoms, often called by the Norse term jarldömur in Scotland.
And his reach went far beyond the mainland.
Oh, much further. He also commanded authority over all the Hebrides, and he held a significant kingdom in Ireland, which was likely focused around Dublin or one of the other major coastal settlements.
You have to consider the sheer geographical and logistical complexity of controlling an empire like that.
From a base in the Northern Isles, no less, an empire spanning 11 mainland Scottish regions, the entire chain of the Western Isles, and territory in Ireland.
Their conquests extended as far south as Moray. And at times, the sagas claim these Orkney-based expeditions pushed their influence as far as the Firth of Forth.
And that's a crucial point. It shows the Orkneys weren't some distant periphery. They were the administrative and military hub of a major political entity in the 11th century North Atlantic world.
The scale of that control says a lot about the organizational capacity of the jarls government.
It really does. And it's compelling that Thorfinn is consistently recognized in the sagas as the last jarl to fully embody the old Scandinavian Viking spirit.
That ruthless, expansive sort of pre-Christian drive.
Exactly. And his biography perfectly encapsulates a critical historical transition, the shift from that pagan, aggressive expansion to a more formal alignment with Christian Europe.
So after a lifetime of warlike expeditions, raids, and acts of arson, sagas show this profound change in him. He becomes penitent.
Yes, and this internal conversion, whether it was purely spiritual or politically expedient, who knows, but it led to a highly visible and symbolic act, a grand pilgrimage.
He undertook a massive journey, traveling through Denmark and Saxony all the way to Rome,
where he received an indulgence for his sins directly from the Pope, And this pilgrimage, you see, was more than just personal salvation. It legitimized his rule in the eyes of the increasingly powerful Christian monarchies of Europe.
It transformed him from a pirate warlord into a recognized, still very formidable, Christian prince.
That's right. Upon his return, he governed his expansive kingdom peacefully until his death around 1064. His life, in essence, marks the formal, institutional establishment of a new Christian era in the Orkneys, despite his incredibly fierce Viking past.
But, as the historical record shows, these kinds of cultural and spiritual shifts are never instantaneous or complete.
Not at all. Even a century after Thorfinn's official conversion and death, the Orkneys were still fostering individuals who were, only nominally Christian.
People who clearly retain the conduct, the values, and the predatory mentality of the older heathen Vikings.
The research suggests that the ethos of organized piracy remains structurally integral to the region's economy. It hadn't just vanished.
And the most dramatic example illustrating this persistence of the Viking lifestyle would be Sven son of Gersay.
Yes. Who operated very aggressively in the middle of the 12th century. His life was essentially institutionalized piracy, not petty crime.
He commanded a formidable band of 80 men, which was a significant private army for the time.
It was. They would winter on the island of Gersay, or Garrixey, and live very well on the accumulated plunder from their previous seasons. Their operational base was secure, their treasury full.
And their focus was purely on the next season of conquest. It's fascinating how organized his life was. It really represents the logical endpoint of that Viking economic model.
A highly structured and strategic annual cycle. He would set out in the spring, but deliberately wait until after seed time.
Which ensured the continuation of his own agricultural base back home. Very clever.
Very. His targets were the wealthy coastal settlements of the Scottish, English, and Irish coasts. He'd return briefly in autumn for the harvest, presumably managing the lands that sustained his base and crew.
And then, rather than settling down for the winter, he'd immediately set out again to harass those same countries until the weather forced his final return.
He was running a seasonal business of raiding and conquest. But his career, however successful, ended abruptly, as such lives often did.
During one of his autumnal expeditions, he actually captured Dublin, which suggests a significant short-term military success.
It does, but while he and his men felt secure within the occupied city, the local inhabitants suddenly mounted a counterattack. Svend was killed along with many of his followers,
who defended themselves bravely, but were ultimately overwhelmed.
And this relentless cycle of violence and plunder, still fully operational a century after the official move to Christianity, it just profoundly underscores the stubborn persistence of that original Viking mentality in the Northern Isles.
So what happened when the opportunities for that kind of external conquest diminished?
Yeah.
Curbed by the new Christian order and the abandonment of deep-sea piracy?
Well, that intense warlike spirit that characterized the Scandinavian population had nowhere left to go. The energy turned inward.
It exhausted itself in centuries of bloody internal feuds.
Exactly. And the memorials of this violence, what you might call jarlicide and localized vengeance, are found scattered across almost all the islands of the Orkney group. It's a dark legacy of political instability.
We can trace this cycle of vengeance through specific events in the sagas, starting far north at North Ronaldshay, which the Norse called Renancy.
Yes, the scene of Jarl Einar's terrible revenge. Einar was driven to avenge the murder of his father, Ragnar Jarl, who had been killed in Norway by Halfdan Haleg,
the son of the powerful King Harald Harfager.
The very one. And Einar's method of revenge is notorious and highly debated among historians: the cutting of the blood eagle on Halfdan's back.
This alleged punishment, it involves cutting the victim's ribs from the spine and pulling the lungs out to resemble wings.
It's gruesome. It mirrors the legendary ritualistic savagery inflicted by the sons of Ragnar Lodbrog upon King Ella of Northumberland.
And whether it's purely a literary device or a historical fact, its inclusion in the sagas is a definitive sign, isn't it?
It is. It shows that the most brutal heathen aspects of the Viking political spirit were invoked and celebrated well into the periods of Norse rule in Scotland, long after the formal conversion.
The subsequent centuries saw this violence just intensify into a constant cycle of political assassination.
Jarlicide, yes. It unfolded rapidly across the smaller islands surrounding mainland. The events show how localized and personal the stakes were. On Sanday, or Sandy, in the 11th century, Jarl Einar Sigurdsson was killed at Lochnes.
And his killer was Thorkel Foster, an influential man known for fostering or raising Einar's brother, who would later become the great Thorfinn Jarl.
The irony is stark, isn't it? The familial relationship between the killer and the victim's surviving kin.
And the feuding was just relentless. Not long after that, Thorfinn's nephew, Jarl Ragnvald Bruson, was killed by the very same Thorkel.
On Little Papa Island, or Papi, and the method was devastating. Thorkel, now working with Thorfinn, surrounded the house where Ragnvald was staying and set it on fire.
Burning the Jarl alive.
Yes, Ragnvald's body was later given a Christian burial on the neighboring island of Papa Westray. But that sequence of violence, foster father killing his foster son's brother, then killing his nephew, it just demonstrates the sheer self-destructive nature of these Orcadian dynastic struggles.
And it wasn't limited to the central players. In Ide, or Edi, we hear of Thorkel Fletter, surnamed the Restless, being burnt in his house.
Which suggests that fire as an execution method had become a depressingly common tactic in these power struggles.
And then, a few decades later, in 1137, Jarl Paul was surprised by the notorious pirate we discussed earlier, Svend Asleifsson, on Rose.
And was forcibly taken prisoner to Atholl in Scotland. This series of events highlights the profound political instability. No leader was truly safe.
Perhaps the most celebrated case of this dynastic violence, because of what came after, occurred around 1110 on Egilshay.
The murder of the respected Jarl Magnus Erlendsson by his own kinsman Jarl Hakon Paulsson.
And this particular act, while tragic, ironically, resulted in the creation of the Orkneys' greatest permanent architectural legacy.
Absolutely. Magnus was canonized after his death and quickly became the patron saint of the Orkneys, providing a much-needed focus for Christian identity amidst all the violence.
In his honor, a church was built on Egilshay, which still exists today, though in an altered form.
We also find evidence of fortification on other small islands, like Wyre or Vigre, where Kolbein Ruga Jarl Ragnvald's politically astute father had a castle in the 12th century. The ramparts are still distinguishable.
Despite all this activity on the smaller islands, mainland, the main island of the Orkneys, remained the true historical nexus.
Without a doubt, it's associated with the most numerous and remarkable memorials of Norwegian dominion. For centuries, numberless Viking fleets anchored in its bays and straits. The Orkneyinga saga, our primary source for this period, is so detailed it names almost every spot on mainland as a residence or the scene of an important event.
And the linguistic evidence, the place names, they confirm a total population replacement across the islands.
They do. They indicate that the Norwegians effectively superseded the older Celtic population. We see these widespread Norwegian place names, a linguistic map of conquest.
Endings like wall for a bay, wick for a smaller inlet, firth, moines for headlands.
And all the settlement names. Buster from Bolstair, Toff for a homestead, and home for a small island. The sheer density of these Norse names signifies long-term settlement, not just transient control.
However, mainland's geopolitical situation led to a kind of administrative paradox.
It did. Its proximity to Scotland and the brisk trade with England had a profound effect on its administrative structure, especially when you compare it to the more remote Shetland Isles.
This sustained contact contributed to the rapid erosion of Norwegian legal institutions in mainland.
Favoring Scottish assimilation, yes. The most notable loss, one that speaks volumes about the replacement of governance, is the total disappearance of the Pingavalar, or Thingvalla.
That was the ancient chief thingplace, the central assembly for legal and political decisions under the Norse system.
And old records expressly mention this site, but it has now vanished from mainland. While you can still trace vestiges of lesser things by name in the more isolated Shetlands, these too were effaced in the Orkneys.
This differential impact is really crucial for understanding the transition.
It is. It demonstrates how powerful Scottish influence, legal and cultural, effectively erased most Norwegian words, customs, and, most importantly, the political structures that survived in Shetland.
To understand the profundity of this loss, you have to realize what the Thing system represented. It was a distinctly Norse form of governance based on the assembly of free men.
Exactly. It provided judicial and legislative functions rooted in the local population. When the Pingavalar vanishes, it signals the collapse of local Norse jurisprudence and its replacement by a centralized, increasingly feudal Scottish administration.
The Orkneys essentially became legally absorbed much faster than their northern neighbors.
And you can see this absorption reflected in the modern dialect. The Norwegian language itself, which had vestiges in Hooray Parish as recently as the last century, is now almost entirely gone.
Only very specific Scandinavian linguistic markers remain, a peculiar singing pronunciation and the archaic use of thou and thee instead of you.
Moving from conflicts and administration, we have to look at the silent monuments, the barrows, and the subsequent grand architecture. The memory of that warlike heathen life is conspicuously preserved in mainland by the many large barrows, or tumuli, across the landscape.
And we must be careful to distinguish these from the monuments of the older pre-Norse inhabitants.
Yes. While some stone-chambered structures, the pyx houses or brocks, belong to the older Celtic population, the great majority of the large earth-thrown barrows are definitively attributable to the Norwegians and Danes.
The defining feature of these Scandinavian barrows is their composition and their placement.
They're large earth mounds, unlike the stone cairns of northern Scotland. And crucially, they're situated almost exclusively on hills or near firths, always affording an uninterrupted view of the open sea. This choice of placement reflects a profound cultural and spiritual mandate.
For the ancient Northmen, the idea of being buried in a confined corner, hidden from the world, was intolerable. The greater the chief, the more they desired that their barrow should be high and unenclosed.
A conspicuous landmark visible to all who traveled by land and, more importantly, by sea. It was an enduring monument to their posthumous fame.
And this desire for visibility was intertwined with their spiritual beliefs about the afterlife.
It's likely they held a belief that their spirit, or ghost, would at times rise from the barrow to look out upon the sea and refresh itself, escaping the gloom of the grave. The barrow was a perpetual vantage point.
Some of the largest of these barrows are found in the middle of mainland, near the Loch of Stennis, adjacent to the famous Celtic stone circles.
Yes, an important confluence of cultures. A specific promontory there, Steinsnes, features 12 considerably sized barrows clustered together like an acropolis.
And this location is historically charged. The saga explicitly records that the chief Einard Kleining killed Jarl Havard, the husband of Eric Bloodux's daughter Raghilded, right there on Steinsnes.
So it's highly plausible that one of these prominent large barrows marks Havard's grave. The Norse predilection for this lofty promontory was likely because the earlier inhabitants already regarded it as a holy place, evidenced by the immense stone circles nearby.
In addition to these massive mounds for the elite, we also find lower, more common heathen graves,
which yield evidence of varied funeral practices, urns with burnt bones and ashes, as well as uncremated bodies. The artifacts found within are highly valuable for dating.
distinctly Norwegian goods, Scandinavian swords, lance heads, daggers, knives, bone combs.
And crucially, those bowl-formed brooches made of brass. They're an essential archaeological marker, virtually absent in England, but found consistently across the Scandinavian settled areas of Scotland.
Moving into the early Middle Ages, after the transition to Christianity, mainland maintained its preeminence. We can trace the movement of power across the island.
Starting in the northwest, in Birsay or Brigisherad, there are still considerable ruins of the old jarls castle. Jarl Thorfin, the great Viking-turned-pilgrim, built Christ Church nearby.
And both he and Jarl Magnus were originally buried there.
Yes, before Magnus's body was translated. Birsay was also the initial ecclesiastical center. Bishop Wilhelm, the first bishop of the Orkneys, had his throne there in the 12th century.
The Jarls also had residences elsewhere, like the castle on the south coast at Orfer, or Orfura.
They resided there until the administrative and ecclesiastical center of gravity shifted fully to Kirkwall.
Kirkwall has remained the capital for about 700 years, strategically situated near an excellent harbor. Its name is a corruption of the Old Norse Kirkjuvager,
which translates to church bay, derived from an earlier, smaller church. Its true rise to prominence, however, was in the 12th century, when Jarl Ragnvald undertook the monumental task of building a large cathedral there.
The dedication of the cathedral to St Magnus and the conveyance of the saint's body to Kirkwall was the single most powerful catalyst for the town's elevation.
The relics of the martyr Jarl provided spiritual legitimacy and attracted pilgrimage, achieving for the town what its excellent harbor alone could not.
Which brings us to St Magnus Cathedral itself. It's incontestably the most glorious surviving monument of the Norwegian dominion in Scotland.
Rivaled only by St Mungo's in Glasgow for its degree of preservation from the destruction of the Reformation. The scale is impressive, 230 feet long, 55 feet wide, with a nave resting on 28 pillars.
The story of its founding, as detailed in the saga, gives fascinating insight into not just religious patronage, but also Norse legal maneuvering.
It does. Jarl Ragnvald, advised by his incredibly astute father, Cole, vowed to build a splendid church to St. Magnus if he gained control of the islands. He obtained dominion in 1137, and construction began immediately.
But initially, the work progressed rapidly, and then the expenses became burdensome.
This is where Cole, Ragnvald's father, showed his genius. He realized a massive centralized fund was needed, and he targeted the structure of Norse land ownership, the feudal law.
Can you explain feudal law briefly? It's quite different from the feudal system.
It is. Feudal law granted allodial ownership. This meant the land was held absolutely, without a lord to whom service was owed. However, a critical loophole existed. Feudal law forced heirs to redeem allodial land from the jarls upon succession.
Which the inhabitants found difficult and burdensome.
Very. It often forced them to mortgage or lose their holdings, so Cole advised Ragnvald to capitalize on this grievance.
Ragnvald summoned the inhabitants to a thing, a political assembly, and offered a transformative deal.
He proposed to sell them their absolute unchallengeable right of feudal, meaning they would no longer be obligated to redeem the land. This was an immense financial relief for the populace.
And in exchange for this permanent security, the jarl obtained a mark for every acre throughout the islands.
This single, massive, and entirely legitimate transaction provided the jarl with enough liquid capital to not only continue but accelerate the construction of the church. Cole essentially monetized the jarl's ancient legal privilege into a building fund.
And this financial narrative helps explain some of the architectural complexities. The whole church, as it stands, wasn't solely the work of Cole and Ragnvald.
No, the portions farthest east and west belong to much later additions, as late as the 16th century. More interesting is the stylistic difference within the original structure.
The portion extending east from the two eastern tower pillars is undoubtedly the oldest part. The style is what we'd call Norman in England.
Heavy construction, round arches. While the style was becoming somewhat obsolete further south, it was naturally retained in the north, especially with a likely Norwegian architect.
However, the section, including the transepts and the 6 western pillars, while still featuring round arches, exhibits a much later style and different scale.
It makes it doubtful whether Cole and Ragnvald completed this part immediately after the feudal funding drive. The archaeologist Sir Henry Dryden proposed a highly plausible scenario.
The Ragnvald started small, ran out of funds, implemented Cole's feudal law reform to gain wealth, and then continued on a larger scale with better workers.
Yes. Dryden concluded that there is a great deal of copying in it, noting that the semicircular arch persisted in Scotland until as late as 1600, so its presence alone doesn't guarantee an early Norman date.
For Scandinavian cultural history, the church holds a particular significance because the saga explicitly states that a layman, Cole, was chiefly answerable for the building and determined how everything should be.
This powerful role for a secular advisor echoes the ambitions seen among Christian descendants of emigrant Vikings, like those in Normandy, to construct splendid religious architecture.
The cathedral also served as the ultimate royal burial site. The body of King Håkon Håkonsson was deposited here during the winter of 1263-1264.
A symbol of the end of direct Norwegian military control. And the Norwegian princess Margaret, the Maid of Norway, was buried there in 1290. Most Norwegian jarls and bishops were laid to rest within its walls, though their original monuments have regrettably been destroyed.
Shifting our focus now from the islands to the Scottish mainland to Caithness and Sutherland. The Orkneys are separated from the Highlands by the Pentland Firth.
A narrow but ferocious stretch of water, only about 8 miles wide. And it's not just a geographic boundary, it's a highly dangerous navigational barrier.
It's notorious for the maelstrom, the powerful whirlpool effect where tidal currents from the North Sea and the Atlantic collide.
Even in calm weather, the waves can reach astonishing heights. Historical accounts confirm the danger. Olaf Tryggvason famously had to avoid it, and King Håkonsson lost a ship there in 1263.
Despite these terrifying conditions, the ancient Norwegians navigated it regularly. They clearly did not view it as a real political boundary between the Orkneys and Scotland.
No, they settled early along the south coast of the Firth, establishing colonies that were seen by the jarls as inseparable parts of the Orkney jarldom.
The naming conventions of the two northernmost Scottish counties bear irrefutable testament to this. These regions originally bore the Gaelic name Catub.
But today they retain their Norwegian names. Caithness, for instance, comes from the Old Norse Caithness, meaning the nays of Catub. And importantly, the Gaelic inhabitants still refer to the region as Galeb,
which translates as stranger's land, a direct acknowledgement of the heavy foreign Norwegian settlement that displaced them.
And Sutherland presents a linguistic curiosity derived directly from the Orkney perspective. Its name comes from the Old Norse settlement, the land in the south.
which is only explicable when understood as being the land to the south relative to the Orkney jarls base.
Exactly. For anyone in Scotland, naming a northwestern region Sutherland is absurd, yet the name stuck.
Caithness forms a distinctive geographical nose pointing northeast. The town and bay of Thurso derive their name from Thurso water, or Orsathor's rivulet.
And this area around Thurso is exceptionally rich in historical memorials, a concentrated zone of Norse political history.
Specific incidents highlight its importance. King Eystein imprisoned Jarl Harald Madadson in Thurso. Nearby stands Harold's Tower, marking the grave of Jarl Harald, who fell in battle in 1190.
And a few miles away, Merkel, or Merkhol, was the infamous site where Ragnhilda, daughter of Eric Bloodaxe, orchestrated the murder of her own husband, Jarl Arnfinn.
And the palace ruins of the bishops of Caithness are near Scrabster, or Skarabolstor, where Bishop Ion was blinded and mutilated in the 12th century.
The linguistic evidence of sustained settlement in northern and eastern Caithness is pervasive. Norwegian place names are scattered here in the same high density as in Orkney. Endings like Toft, Setter, Busta, and particularly Luster. Bays are called go, or wick.
We also find funerary architecture reflecting the Norse presence. Mighty barrows, sometimes right near the Pentland Firth coast, attributing to daring Vikings.
And these graves have yielded the signature Scandinavian bowl-formed brooches of brass, which, as we noted, are distinct regional artifacts.
Caithness remained subject to the Norwegian jarls until the 14th century. The enduring cultural legacy is physically and linguistically evident today.
The inhabitants of the plains speak the same English dialect as the Orkneys. They bear pure Scandinavian surnames: Ronald, Harold, Swanson, Manson.
And their physical characteristics, tall figures, light hair, broad faces, contrast fundamentally with the shorter, swarthier Gaelic Highlanders to the south.
This striking difference illustrates the deep ethnic divide resulting from the initial Norse settlement.
Caithness, therefore, provides a unique opportunity to observe the successful implanting of nautical skill.
It does. The Gaelic inhabitants of the Highlands traditionally show a decided aversion, even fear, of the sea. It's considered exceptionally unwise to venture into the Pentland Firth in boats steered by Highlanders.
They often lose command in a storm. But the descendants of the Norwegian settlers, in sharp contrast, display remarkable coolness and innate nautical knowledge.
They are familiar with the sea from childhood. This is institutionalized. Wick, in this Norse-descended area, has historically been one of Scotland's most important fishing stations.
Which raises a crucial question about the relative impact of lineage versus geography in shaping a population's economic future.
Moving further south into Sutherland, the boundary of Norwegian linguistic influence becomes a fascinating study. The common English language ends abruptly south of the parish of Wick.
Yet even deep within this transition zone, Norwegian names persist, often in tautological combination with Gaelic terms. Helmsdale, for example, is the Norwegian Kalmensdal.
And the Gaelic inhabitants called the valley Strath Uli, or tautologically, Strath Helmsdale. Strath means valley, so they've added their own marker to the existing name.
The ancient seat of the Earls of Sutherland, Dunrobin, was likely a chief residence for the early jarls, Sigurd and Thorfin.
Yes, and the presence of Norwegian antiquities, like the bowl-formed brooches, in graves nearby reinforces the depth of the Norse presence there.
Jarl Sigurd the Stout famously extended his dominion as far as Eikjalsbakk, the bank of the Okill River,
which still serves as the southern boundary of Sutherland. It was here that Sigurd defeated the Scottish Jarl Melbrigd, but he met a bizarre and fatal end.
In triumph, Sigurd had Melbrig's severed head hung to his saddle.
But a sharp tooth projecting from the head chafed his leg during the ride home, causing a wound that proved fatal. It's an incredible anecdote marking the limit of Norse expansion.
Further south, the settlements extended down the east coast into Inverness-shire and Moray. Tain, for instance, is a corruption of figs, a thing, confirming its foreign legal origin.
And even further south, Dingwall, at the extremity of Cromarty Firth, was originally a Lengavaller, or Thingwalla, a superior central thing site.
The presence of both an inferior thing at Tain and a superior one at Dingwall indicates a substantial, organized Norwegian population that required an established legal infrastructure.
However, the north and west coasts of Sutherland, rocky, mountainous, less appealing for agriculture, show fewer traces of permanent settlement. Even here, though, the linguistic adaptation is clear.
The Halladale Valley has two waterfalls, Forsenard and Forsenden. Fors is Old Norse for waterfall.
But Gaelic terminations, Arder for upper and Inden for lower, were added, showing the Gaelic linguistic overlay.
Nonetheless, the Norwegians established command over the whole north and west coast, focusing on 4 large firths: the Kyle of Tongue, Loch Erebol, the Kyle of Durness, and Loch Laxford.
Laxafjörður, or salmon firth. The use of the Gaelic term loch in Loch Laxford is another tautology.
The region of stable Norwegian population seems to have ceased around Laxford. Further south, the difficult terrain meant they limited activities to levying provisions and plundering cattle.
Which is why Scottish kings, like Alexander II, built castles specifically to prevent the Danes from making these devastating descents into the Highland territories.
Finally, we must analyze the intangible but powerful legacy, the lingering shadow of the Danes in local folklore.
The memory of Norwegian conquests persists strongly, particularly among the economically vulnerable classes in Sutherland and the Highlands. It's a highly personalized and negative memory.
Traditions circulate about demanding levies of provisions. Barrows are pointed out as the graves of Scandinavian princes killed by natives, reinforcing a narrative of resistance.
And there's one unique accusation: the belief that the Danes deliberately burnt the forests, causing the current lack of wood and negatively affecting the climate.
And this is reinforced by physical evidence, the discovery of scorched roots and trunks in turf bogs.
Though this phenomenon is common across Northern Europe and likely has other causes, the local narrative attributes this environmental devastation specifically and angrily to the Danes.
Yet, in a strange cultural compensation, the Danes are also sometimes credited as teachers. Thorf Einar was said to be named because he first caused turf to be dug.
And consequently, local people still credit the Danes with teaching them the essential skill of turf burning for fuel. Other attributed inventions include hand querns and even the bagpipes.
If anything of doubtful origin exists, it is frequently attributed to the mysterious and often demonized Danes.
A peculiar and striking feature is the lingering, almost paranoid dread that the Danes might suddenly return. This manifested in extremely peculiar incidents relatively recently.
An incident around 1890 involved English engineers conducting topographical surveys in Sutherland. This caused significant alarm among the natives.
They concluded the engineers were Danish spies sent to map the country before a new Danish army landed to take sanguinary revenge on the Mackay clan.
This fear was intense. When researchers were examining so-called Danish towers, the common people believed the observers were Danish agents preparing to rebuild the ruined coastal castles.
The rumor escalated, with one observer being identified as the Danish king's son, secretly landed to survey the area for an incoming fleet.
This anxiety had immediate practical consequences. It caused the poorer classes to avoid mentioning any traditions about Danish defeats, lest they provoke bloody vengeance.
Local guides were stopped by fellow villagers and requested in Gaelic not to assert the supposed enemy. The guides had to falsely claim that existing maps already indicated all the old castles.
The emotional impact on the older generations was severe. In Gaelic villages near Loch Inver and Kyle Scu, old residents were seen wringing their hands in despair upon a traveler's departure, genuinely anticipating the terrible misfortunes the Danes would bring.
We find one final, powerful example of this folklore in Dornoch. A stone pillar outside the town, actually a Roman Catholic cross, is traditionally linked to a battle where the Jarl of Sutherland fought a Danish chief.
The legend claims the Jarl's sword broke, but he seized a horseshoe and used it to kill his adversary. The horseshoe was then adopted as the town's official arms.
Furthermore, a carved medieval monument in Dornoch Cathedral of a bishop is incorrectly identified by local tradition as depicting a casualty of this same battle. The local guides showing it expressed immense pride that the Danes were defeated, illustrating the strong local narrative of resistance.
The persistence of ethnic and nautical differences between the descendants of the Norse settlers in Caithness and the neighboring Gaelic Highlanders raises significant questions regarding the relative impact of environment versus lineage in determining cultural and economic adaptation to maritime life, even centuries after assimilation.
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed learning something new. That's all for now, but in case you didn't notice, there are a lot more episodes on this subject available on this channel. If you're enjoying these historical podcasts, please like and subscribe and share with other history buffs.
While this is an AI recording, the research that has gone into this production is comprehensive and focuses on very specific moments in history, designed to bring as much detail to the listener as possible. Thanks again for listening in.